Hi guys, Wes here. Today I'd like to talk to you about a con artist. The sad thing is you've probably never heard about this con artist. When I talk about con artists, you probably think of people like Frank Abagnale, the subject of the movie Catch Me If You Can, who convinced people that he was a lawyer and a doctor and an airline pilot. The guy I'm going to talk to you about today is so badass, it makes Frank Abagnale's stuff look like child's play. And it's so sad that people don't know about this guy because his actions and his trickery had a very large impact in how the World War II played out in Europe. If he had not played his game as well as he did, people would probably... history would be vastly different than it is. D-Day probably would have failed. Anyway, his name is Juan Pujol Garcia. He was born in the 1900s. He was born in Spain. He was raised with very strong ideals. He hated fascism. He hated the Nazi Party. When World War II started, he was determined to do anything that he could to end Hitler's reign of terror. But the thing was, he was also a crazy dreamer. He was not anchored in reality. He had such a hard time making a go of it. His father was pretty disappointed in the way that he turned out. He was a bad, lousy student. He had trouble holding down jobs. Anyway, eventually he was able to attain to the point where he was managing a hotel. And when World War II broke out, he wanted to do anything that he could, but he was just an ordinary guy. And he was a hotel owner. He had a history of working on farms. He had about as much chance of becoming involved with British intelligence or German intelligence as you or I have of competing in the decathlon in the Olympics this year. He was not skilled he had never been to school to learn about what espionage entails. All he had was this wacky imagination. And so the first thing is he went to the British intelligence. He wanted to bring Hitler down, and he knew he had this crazy mind and he had the ability to create all this crazy fantasy reality. And so he went to the British intelligence agency and he said, "Hey, I want to get on board. I want to take down Hitler. Would you let me become a spy?" They kind of laughed him out of the room, as you can imagine. A chicken farmer, a hotel owner, asking, "I want to be a spy. I want to be James Bond." And so they kind of just wrote him off, and he left, and he was like, "Fine, I see how it is." So what he did was he realized he had to establish his ability to fool people. So what he did was he went to the German intelligence, and somehow he managed to forge documents to make it look as though he had had a history in espionage activities as a spy. He was a guy who knew what he was doing, and he forged these documents, and he made the German intelligence agency think he was legit. And so they took him on as a spy, and then they sent him to London, England. But he didn't go to London, England. He went to Lisbon, Portugal. And he had never been to England, and he bought a British tour guide in Portugal, and he had information on London subways, and he managed to convince the German intelligence agency that he was burrowed deep in London's society. And he started passing on details, completely fabricated details that had no bearing on reality. And he managed to create and concoct this network of spies that were working for him. And none of these people existed, but he portrayed himself as I've established myself, I have this network of 30 different people reporting to me, giving me details on different aspects of what the German military is planning. And so the Germans were convinced. Now this is where it gets interesting. The British people, the British intelligence agency, they see some of his reports, And he even manages to convince them that somehow he has gotten embedded in that he is in England and that he has embedded himself uh, years some of the people, when they found out that he was not actually in England, they refused to believe it at first because his details were so convincing. He knew the locations of businesses. He knew like what time the subways left, and it took some convincing for these people in the British intelligence agency to think that he actually had not ever been to England. He played his game so well. Anyway, the British intelligence agency, they contact him. I guess they had records from when he came to their offices years ago, and they were like, "Hey, we'll take you on now. You've proven your ability to commit fraud and trickery with the German high command." So they took him on. They flew him to London, and then they actually started giving him legitimate details, like unimportant, trivial details, just to prove to the German high command that he was passing on legitimate information, that he was a valuable person to have on. He was this double agent, and his loyalty lay with the British intelligence agency, but he managed to convince the Germans of his legitimacy as a German spy in British society. And yeah, crazy. And like when one of his reports would be proven false, he would pass along details about how he had executed somebody that was working for him, and like he'd killed them in cold blood for passing on incorrect information. And the Germans were convinced this guy's on our side. He's got our interests at heart. Anyway, uh, the most interesting part was his involvement in the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, Operation Overlord. He had so endeared himself to the German high command that they were convinced, when he passed along details, he convinced them that there was a 1,000,000-man army ready to attack in a different location. And the British intelligence, they'd even put in some dummy tanks to give some kind of legitimacy to what this guy was saying. And he convinced the Germans that the primary invasion was going to go down at Calais, not at Normandy. And up until like even a couple of weeks after the D-Day invasion, Hitler was still convinced that the main attack was coming from this alternate location. And essentially what he did was he managed to so endear himself to the Germans that even after the invasion, they were convinced that the details he was passing on about this 1,000,000-man army marching on Calais were so legitimate that they were able to overlook what had happened at Normandy and be like, okay, that was bad, but what's really going to be bad is what happens over here. If he hadn't played this off, and like you hear these interviews with him, and he talks about like when he was doing this stuff, especially at the beginning of his career, he had no idea what he was doing. He was just trying to BS some random stuff and be like, this is what's going down. And he had no idea if at any minute he might have been found out. But like I said, he managed to convince the Germans of his loyalty, even to the point he is the only person involved in World War II who received the highest honors from both sides. The Germans gave him the Iron Cross. Like, they were so convinced of his loyalty throughout the war effort that they awarded him the Iron Cross at some point, and the British, they awarded him this award. And anyway, just a fascinating figure. Like I said, if he had not played his game so well, it's quite possible Germany would have wiped out much larger portions of Europe than they did, and the invasion of Normandy most likely would have been a complete failure because Hitler had dispatched some of the strongest German tank divisions to D-Day, to Normandy, convinced that the invasion was coming from Normandy, until this guy said it's not coming from Normandy. And Hitler believed him. So, and even Hitler's top aides were like, they were trying to convince the Fuhrer, this guy is a liar and a scam artist. You need to not listen to him. It's coming from Normandy. And Hitler thought so highly of this guy that he refused to listen to some of his top advisors and be like, no, this guy is legit. He is telling me the truth about this 1,000,000-man army coming and marching on Calais. And yes, if he hadn't played his role so well, World War II would have ended much differently. Juan Pujol Garcia, worth checking out. He survived the war, obviously, and yes, fascinating guy. Thank you for listening.